Hello, everybody, and welcome to the TeacherCast Educational Network. My name is Jeff Bradbury. Thank you so much for joining us today and making TeacherCast your home for professional development. This is the Jeff Bradbury Show, a podcast for educators looking to have great conversations with those who are making the world a better place. On today's episode, I have a CEO of a fantastic new company that is going to be rocketing the way that teachers and students interact with politics. She has a BS in biomedical engineering, an MS in mechanical engineering, an MBA. She was highlighted as Time Magazine's top 100 inventions of the year. She's won the Young Research Science Award, and something I'm looking forward to having a conversation with her about, she races cars. I want to bring on today a fantastic entrepreneur, Miss Vienna Mott. Vienna, how are you today? Welcome to TeacherCast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. We were talking before the show. You are up in Alaska these days. What is Alaska like in the middle of August?
Very nice. Very not December. It's really nice being here this time of year. We get to spend all day outside. We don't have blackout curtains like most people do because I try to actually wake up in the morning and start to see the world. But with the time zone difference, I usually work early, try to get off early, and then go enjoy the sun. So it's been really nice. No northern light
And
sightings yet this year. There was one, and I was out of town, but hopefully,
are you out there in shorts? Are you still out there in heavy jackets? What is it like up there?
Right now it's probably 60 something outside. I haven't been outside today yet, I'll confess. I think it'll hit 70 on Sunday, so that means everyone will be in shorts. I grew up in Buffalo, so I'm kind of if it's 70, I'll wear shorts person, but I'm a little bit of a baby about the cold these days, so might still be in a jacket.
Very nice.
So
You
that's
have
what's
a
Alaska.
You have a fantastic and very interesting story to share with us. You've got all of these great college experiences. You were highlighted by Time, and you're also the CEO of your own company. Talk to us a little bit about Poliquicks and how
Yeah.
we can take advantage of this growing political atmosphere and really help our students learn more about what's going on in the world.
Yeah, so Poliquicks is a nonpartisan political education app. Initially, we intended to be an 18 plus kind of audience, maybe the Gen Z millennial group. And then we realized that there's a real need. And, your last access point to somebody, to everybody is high school. So we kind of lowered that age. And like I said, initially we thought they can't vote, so maybe they won't care. But, we had a lot of conversations with educators, policymakers around, the lack of civic education funding and how hopefully that will kind of follow the STEM trend and increase the way that STEM has. If you look at STEM funding, it's about $50 a head. Civic education is 50 cents, and you really see the reflection of that in their test scores and everything else. So, we've had some good conversations with educators about really trying to find interesting ways to implement civic education, because generally, like most education, I would say the topic, maybe even more so than some others, is pretty bland. So we're trying to get people to understand, what impacts them and how they could make a difference. And, I think people do best when it's a little bit selfishly based, but that's not always a bad thing.
And when we're looking at, as you mentioned, civics curriculum, not something that is heavily leaned on versus the STEM, courses right now. Are you seeing a growth in that? Are you working with school districts right now to try to bring that more into the conversation? I mean, it's no surprise. This is an important year to be having these conversations. Where do you see this movement heading right now?
Yeah, certainly. I think that there is a good trend right now. I think with the federal election, a lot of people are piggybacking on that, trying to make this more of a conversation. It's a little tricky because I think that STEM there's a clear impact when I mean, I have a STEM background. I love STEM. I'm very passionate about it. I could talk about it all day. But when it comes to politics, I think that there's a really strong impact on everyone. And STEM, similar kind of association where it does impact your life every day. But I think it's very important to try to marry those as much as you can. And, you can approach civic tech from a STEM standpoint too. I think that it will take a little bit of time to really build up the education, argument in some ways. And I think for a while there may still be a bit of a plateau, but, we speak to educators, students, various users of all different ages. We talk to the political candidate side and the elected officials, and there's this really large gap, and it mainly comes down to the fact that political information is not accessible or transparent, and so putting it into our app is a way to make it both of those things. And we do bring everything down to an age appropriate level. So words that are deemed to be above an 11th grade level are all underlined and defined. Even then, we still do some 9th, 10th grade words depending on, the content. So we're really trying to make it that, you read something and you understand it. You're not going back and trying to Google what each of those words mean or trip up on that. And I think that a lot of civic education that really becomes a big issue. And you see it in math too. You don't understand how to add, you're not going to be able to multiply. And we see some kids only get one class of civic education. And so it builds up very quickly. It doesn't really make a lot of sense sometimes. And you're seeing a lot of things that you think you understand until you don't. There's 3 branches of government. They start to talk about it. And then before you know it, it kind of snowballs. And it's a very confusing concept suddenly.
And for many, and this is the dad coming out, they learn that in 4th grade. And sometimes that's the end of their civics education.
Right. And I mean, you see, I believe it's a 24% is the current statistic of students in high school that are proficient when they graduate in civics education. And it's been stagnant for years. So, I mean, there's a clear need. It's just, we're pushing AI so hard right now. We're pushing STEM and understandably so. But I think, to have well-rounded students and, when I look at my past, my mom was always very pushy on us. She would say, we would do spelling bees and geography bees. And she said, if you can do math and you can write well, you'll do very well in the world. And I've seen a big difference between myself and my peers who maybe don't have the same spelling and grammar background because they were good at math and that's what they did. And they become very great researchers, not great at presenting, not good at writing sometimes. And to be a well-rounded person, you really do need to have all of that education and I think kind of understanding of the importance, even if it's not that interesting to you.
Well, tell me a little bit about the goals of the platform here. You said that it was originally for 18 plus, you then brought it down to high school. Are you looking to create this platform so that way the younger generation can have access to it? Are you looking to see teachers using this as like an ed tech platform with lesson plans? And where do you see the future of this going? And is that something that's going to be launching before the election?
Yeah, so we're launching in about 2 weeks. Within the app, you can find all the information you really need. We do offer a supplemental index of topics that are all found within the app, and those are common to most of the textbooks in the US. That's what we provide instructors and teachers. We do a training on that as well. We do some workshops when they need it. But yeah, the students are intended to, read their textbook, but then understand how to use the app. We have a lot of information on candidates, representatives, and political topics at the local, state, and federal level. So the idea is, they'll probably throw out their textbook or maybe, bury it or burn it or whatever, but they can carry this with them forever. And I think that most of the time we don't really understand the impact of our local government, especially, which arguably impacts your day-to-day life more. And so we spend a lot of time through, we also have projects that we include, and we have a learning tab in there, which kind of looks like Candy Crush and has kind of Duolingo style modules. And so what we do is we're really trying to figure out for each kid what it is that they care about, and then tell them that they can make a difference in that. So if you don't care about your roads, I don't know anyone that drives that doesn't complain about their roads or, taxes or the fact that they're building a new stadium in the middle of, I don't know, a highway, so we just have to find the one thing that stands out to each kid and really drive home that they can make a difference.
You mentioned this is going to be coming out late August, early September. How does a school district sign up for this? Is it going to be subscription based or a one-time fee, or is it going to be open? How does a school district take advantage of it?
Yeah, so the app itself is free, and we recommend that, they encourage their students to download it anyway. If they are a partner school, we have a paid supplementary, textbook offering. We call it kind of supplemental curriculum, but it's light on the curriculum, more so getting them to use the app and kind of have that hybrid approach. So we do charge a fee for that, but this year, because it's a little late in the school year for some budgets and things like that, we're being more flexible. So it's a really good time to get in because we're able to offer either maybe a free workshop, or we can do extra training. We can add parts of their textbooks in so that it's customized. If they learn about something different or they have a non-standard textbook, we can add those topics in, and then they'll be able to use that. So it's a really nice customizable tool in that way.
So I got to ask, you're here on the verge of launching your first major company, essentially. What have you learned over the last month or two about doing all of this, building this up, relationships, marketing this, getting this launched, working with investors? What have you learned about this?
Yeah, a lot of things, so many things. I think one thing that's really stood out to me, and I've done talks on this too, that you know, I have never really feared rejection in the way that I think a lot of people do. When I was 5, I asked my mom told me I could be anything I wanted when I grew up, and I said, "Can I be a monkey?" And she said, "Sure." I think I've always felt that way. When I was supposed to go to kindergarten, I said, "Why do I have to go? I already know everything." I think I've always had, while I lack confidence at times, I've never been afraid of someone saying no, and I've always been, comfortable, as shy as I was and can be, going up to someone and saying like, "Hey, are you interested in talking? Are you interested in hearing about this?" Um, I think it's very important to seek out mentors at a young age. As soon as you know something that you might be getting into, even if you think you're the best at it, it can never hurt to reach out and just say, "Hey, do you want to hear my idea?" Because those connections really do come back up later. And you mentioned relationships. I think that that's something that a lot of my life I maybe didn't think to prioritize because I was so focused on what I was doing. But there are so many people out there who do want to help you or are interested in what you're doing, and you never know what that one connection can bring. And a million rooms you could be in that are all no's, but you won't know until you're in the right room to ask something to get that yes.
That is a fantastic way to look at life. And with all the teachers who are listening to this and learning from you today, what advice do you have for educators that are just getting started in this school year? They're going to have a few students just like you, but they're also going to have a few students that are probably the opposite of you going, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm kind of nervous about this. I don't want to give a presentation. I don't know anything about these topics. I'm going to go in the corner. Tell us a little bit about how we can help out students in our classrooms today.
Yeah, I've been tutoring a lot of my life and I've done coaching with, resume building and career selection and things like that. And I'm very passionate about those things. I think that education is very important, both traditional and not, formal and not. And that can be through mentorship or whatever. I think it's very important to look at an individual child and say, to kind of understand their limitations, their desires, their interests, and have that one-on-one conversation where you're saying, "I want to help you grow as much as you're willing to. If you don't want to give that presentation, how can we work to get you comfortable?" And I think that I was diagnosed with ADHD and autism late in life, and I think had that been earlier, or maybe if I had not grown up in such a strict family, maybe I would have acted a little differently. I had issues with the shaking and all that stuff, and I just learned to not do it because I didn't want to get in trouble. But I think if somebody had recognized how shy I was and talked to me about that, and I would always volunteer to be a leader or raise my hand, even though it was really out of my comfort zone, because I knew that I had a goal to be some kind of leader, or I wanted to stand out, I wanted the good grades. And so I think when you understand their goals and their motivation, what they're interested in, it's much easier to kind of inspire them to step out of their comfort zone. And when you have kids on the other side of that who are kind of the overachievers too, in a lot of ways, I still think it's the same kind of thing. Like, do you want them to cap out at what you have, or can you really give them something extra to make them learn a little bit more, whether that's setting them up with a mentor or pairing them with an older child to kind of guide them, telling them what they can ask their parents to help them with, or some course they can do online.
You had mentioned some of my favorite acronyms a while back there that hit home not only as a parent, but also as a teacher. Do you remember a time where you realized that those acronyms were your superpower?
I struggled a lot with it because I knew there was something about me that was different. I was diagnosed with social anxiety when I was 8 because I really had trouble in school talking to kids. I was getting bullied, beaten up. I would sometimes say weird things because I was kind of at a much older age. I started reading at 2. So in kindergarten, when everyone napped, they sent me with the third graders to go read. And so I wasn't really getting the socialization that I probably needed. And so a lot of my life, I really resented that. I didn't have a lot of friends. When I did, I would really struggle with what to talk about. Um, and then when I got into undergrad, I think it started to shift because, I went to an all girls high school. I wasn't allowed to date. And then there were all of a sudden a lot of boys. And I felt like the way that I talked about things kind of fit in better just because and I like cars and math and nerdy things. And I think that, in engineering school where there's other kids who had similar interests, it kind of taught me, I had all these weird special interests that I didn't understand. And so that kind of helped me understand a little more. But I wasn't diagnosed until far after I graduated. And so I don't know that I've ever spent a lot of time thinking. I've heard, the whole superpower thing. I think there are pros and cons to being autistic and having ADHD. But I do know that a lot of my desire to succeed and my interests and places like rooms that I've been in and the way that I interact with people is directly correlated to that. So I am grateful that my brain's a little bit different. But there are days where it doesn't stop, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I just want to relax.
I that hits home on a lot of different angles. We can talk about that one after the show is over, but that one hits home on a lot of angles.
Okay.
I wanted to bring up something that we mentioned earlier. You got into car racing. I saw that on your bio. What is that all about?
I don't really know what started it. I remember I was never, and this is kind of ironic because I know I said I started reading at a really young age and all of that. I never liked reading. I think now that I'm older, it has to do with the ADHD and the fact that I would read things 15 times and also I have aphantasia where when you close your eyes, you can't see anything. And so, other people can visualize books and they really enjoy it. I've never liked reading, watching movies, anything like that. I want to do too many things. And so when I would go to the book fair, I would get like the Guinness World Book of Records or, some kind of car poster or something like that. And so that's kind of where it started. And then as I got older, when I did my master's, it was mechanical engineering. So I started to really like, planes and trains and cars even more. And I thought that they were so fun. I used to drive a lot more. Alaska is not really super great for that. But prior to that, I had an F-type and it was the most fun thing. I have my new dream car, but I'll be doing business a lot longer before I get that.
So one of the topics that has been on the minds of educators is STEM education, primarily making sure that STEM education for all is readily available. And again, I can't go back to the fact that I've got two boys and a girl here. I'm constantly trying to work with both of or all three of them equally to make sure that we're doing all the coding stuff and the 3D printers and the robotics and everything. Talk to us a little bit about how we as teachers can make sure that STEM education, all those topics I just mentioned, are available equally for all of our students this year.
Yeah, that's really tricky. I think it's becoming increasingly difficult because the pressure is really there. I didn't have a 3D printer when I was 5 or 10 or even 15. And the coding and all that, like I was introduced at some point, but I didn't even learn how to type until I switched schools in elementary because of the bullying situation, and all the other kids could type and I couldn't. And I felt this huge disconnect of other kids having these other skills that I didn't have. And it took a lot of self-motivation to want to learn. I had to take typing classes and all of that. I think, from an educator standpoint, kind of it's very, very tricky to, make sure that every kid is getting introduced equally because there's not equal interest. So I think that it's important to kind of figure out where, their interests might be. And that's kind of broad, not individual to the child. But if you just think broadly in a classroom, some kids will care about computers and coding. Some kids will want to build things. Some kids will want, to play with a robot, even if it means picking it apart and putting it together. So I think trying to have, 3 or 4 different things that they might be interested in and sort of even group projects where they each have something like that and they teach it to the class or something. I think STEM education and introduction has become, a very high pressure field where, you want to be the best and you want to have the most access, but it doesn't necessarily need that. I think it's more of growing that interest because the kids will seek those things out or they'll ask about it or they'll, show some kind of interest and some kids won't. And that's totally normal. I do think that we need to be very on top of the fact that and this kind of rolls into all kinds of technology. It's moving quickly and we have to keep up with it. And so to get ahead of it, it's really just, figuring out what they like, making sure they're introduced to the topics, and then knowing that they will have a chance to catch up, even if they don't show interest right now.
Well, I think a lot of teachers still, even now, are still unsure how to get into some of these topics. I mean, when we think STEM, we're thinking, marshmallows and toothpicks and stuff like that, STEM challenges. But I mean, S is science. That could be astronomy. That could be and all these different fields. Technology could be web development. Technology could be coding. Math could be everything under the sun. How can we take advantage of all these different resources that are out there, government programs, app developers? What ways are you seeing school districts really try to break that mold to make sure that these resources, these lessons, these activities are able to be used, and training their teachers even on how to get into STEM and make STEM a part of everyday teaching?
Yeah, it's definitely difficult, but becoming more accessible. You see a lot of nonprofits like Girls Who Code and things like that trying to, get some interest. And what I love about those is, they really do offer a lot of teacher trainings depending on, which group you look at. I think that there's a little bit of nuance here in like you're saying, there's so many parts of STEM that you can't really just teach STEM. You can introduce them, like, you might be interested in animals, there's a science that's associated with that. It can be a little overwhelming. It can be very overwhelming, honestly. And I think that, very early on, I think that one of the best things teachers can do is to find parents or mentors or businesses or whatever to come in and talk to the kids kind of about where STEM fields go and what they can do. And I've done talks more about my biomed background where I would talk about working on medical devices and things like that, and things that I didn't know that existed when I was a kid. There were other kids whose parents were in that, and they had exposure, but I didn't. I didn't even know that was a career until I Googled it. And I only found it because I wanted to be a doctor, but I was scared of blood. And so I think that even just those introductions, they're not natural to kids. They don't necessarily know that they can be, a biologist or a geologist or a mathematician or, any of those things. And so even just introducing kind of, these longer term career options sometimes like spark something where suddenly they have more interest. But when it comes to accessibility, I think the other thing that's very important to remember is that STEM topics and activities don't have to be expensive and difficult. You can find many things online. You can ask them to, you can get things that are reusable. It doesn't necessarily have to be a really, time intensive or expensive thing. It does require creativity and effort on the teacher's part, which, is a huge responsibility. But like I said, I think finding those mentors in different groups. I've done science fairs where we, show teachers different experiments they can do with the kids that are low cost. I think that those are really impactful. I still have my first rocket I made.
What's your favorite icebreaker? What's your favorite low cost activity for students?
I have done a few that I've really liked. I would say it depends on the age. Are you talking more like elementary, middle school?
Let's say you're starting teaching to teach middle school next week.
One of my favorites that wasn't too bad was we had an LED light and made a little alarm. And we did the electrical work on a computer. That was very easy, low cost. And I think it was kind of funny because the kids are racing because it's a obvious noise when you finish. So all of a sudden they want to win and they want to do it the fastest. And then you get the kids who are little superstars and they're trying to rewire it. And I think it was a fun introduction. But I also love things like, the basic volcanoes. I think anything that involves anatomy is really interesting to little kids. It's one of my favorite things. I think earth science, for example, I always loved it, but I know that it can be very hard to teach and it can be not as interesting. So I think that that's one that, they either have interest or not. And so, if they don't, trying to find things like, weather type things that are kind of a little more immersive, but some of the, some STEM topics are just more dry than others. Math, that one's very hard. I don't know if anyone's cracked the code on that one.
There's a lot of people who are certainly trying out there and trying to make it fun, because if you can crack that one, you can pretty much crack them all. We're talking today to Vienna Mott, the CEO of a fantastic new application coming out called Poliquicks, PoliQuicks.com. We're going to make sure that we have all of the links over in our show notes. This is the Jeff Bradbury Show, episode number 55. And Vienna, first of all, thank you so much for your time. Before I let you go, I want to see if I can get you to talk about a topic that is clearly on the mind of every educator, every administrator out there, every government official: artificial intelligence. I know that as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, the challenge is, how can I use it to my advantage? As a teacher, we're all walking into our classroom saying, how do we keep our kids learning about it? Yet, how do we teach them how not to use it for X, Y, and Z reasons? What advice do you have going into this year for teachers to teach it, teach about it, teach the boundaries? We know that it's the calculator of the 80s, right? Like, this is not going away. You have to know how to use it. Long division is still great, but the calculator is here. And as myself being a middle school technology teacher, I'm trying to be the one that is teaching it in a world where we're just not ready yet. What advice do you have for helping students to get ahead of the game in artificial intelligence?
Yeah, I actually I see a lot of parallels to the calculator, where when we were younger, teachers were so adamant about you needing to know everything that you might not have a calculator. I think it's very important to have structural understanding of certain things, but I also think there are time saving efforts where you can kind of get around that. I think encouraging AI is and openly is great. It's kind of like being a parent. Like if you discourage it, they're going to use it, and you're probably not going to catch them because you might not really know what to look for. I think that's a way that educators can also become more familiar with AI as it keeps evolving. Because in this case, I think kids kind of have a huge advantage here. And, it's the same thing as if I look at my grandma with a cell phone versus myself, it's, if, and, I taught her how to use it and everything like that. But I think it's very important to, allow them to use it and explain how they're using it. And then that's how you kind of catch some of the things that may otherwise not be, and I don't think they're intentionally going out and trying to all cheat or something. But even if they are, like, being able to work around that is very helpful. Even if you let them use AI and then you tell them, now write about what assumptions might be incorrect. I think that that's one of the most important things to understand with AI that a lot of younger people are kind of maybe not as familiar with. Like talking about hallucinations within AI. They know that it can search something and it's mostly correct, but how do you check for that? How do you have the media literacy or other literacy, AI literacy, to be able to go in and look at something and say that doesn't look right? I think that's going to be a very important skill. It's not that AI is necessarily going to take your job, but people that know it well will. And it's going to keep evolving. People are just going to have to keep learning. We always say we fight AI with AI. It's there's going to be more and more essentially fake news and things like that. And so the only thing we can do to keep up with it is use AI to fight it. And so I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with AI. I know that it was introduced in a very quick and aggressive manner. It came full force at people, but it's not always a bad thing. And the innovation that's going to come out of it is, it's going to do wonders. And as policy keeps evolving around responsible AI, just kind of keeping up with that, which you can do in the Poliquicks app, but just following along with what's going on and knowing, as security things come up and new regulations and just kind of understanding that, that's usually a pretty good indicator of, this is kind of a line of where we may not want to use this. Yeah, I think, AI is the most common question we get. We use AI with politics and education. It's certainly an understandable fear, but also, like I said, we have to know that it's there, it's coming, we can't stop it. And so, what can we do to use it the most responsibly we can?
I think going back to the calculator conversation, we have school districts right now who are teaching how to use a calculator. We've got school districts who are still teaching long division. And then you've got the school districts that are out there showing how to program the calculator to do things. And I think that's where we are with the AI, where there's school districts that still have hands off. And then there's school districts who are not teaching how to use Chat GPT and Copilot, but how do you make your own? And that is, I think, unfortunately, widening this educational gap that we have. But luckily, we do have programs out there that are going to help out. Where do you recommend teachers and students look towards to learn how to bring AI and how to code in AI? Where do you look to for inspiration on that?
Yeah, I think that can be tricky. I think there's a lot of really good resources out there. And they're being updated daily. I think that's why it's hard for me to say, because every time I see something, I'm like, oh, this is the new best thing. And there are so many great resources. I think often you can't really go wrong, which is one thing that I love about it right now, because there's just so much out there. I use ChatGPT. I am not going to say if it's my favorite or least favorite, but I use other things too. But I think that there are great learnings that you can have out of, just researching what's out there. Unfortunately, I don't feel like I have a strong favorite. It just depends what I'm doing. We use Perplexity sometimes. That one's really good. But then, in general, like to find tools, I usually just Google based on what I'm looking for right now because the landscape changes so quickly.
Talking today to Vienna Mott. First of all, thank you again so much for coming on the show. I want to kind of leave the floor with you here and say, as we're going into this new school year, do you have any advice or any last thoughts for teachers going into the school year about politics, about teaching civics, about STEM? What advice or what would your lasting conversation be to teachers before they hit the classroom this year?
Yeah, I think that, we have kind of changed the landscape of how we interact with students, how we interact with other people. And it can be a very hostile world out there. I think, treating children with a lot of compassion and understanding that they may not have the same interests as you would like or as each other. And it's incredibly frustrating. And, from tutoring and coaching gymnastics and all that stuff, I totally understand, how different kids can be. But, if you can just make one impact on them, whether it's something to get involved in local government, getting them excited about STEM, anything like that, that can be a really long lasting impact. I mean, kids remember teachers from times in their life for very good or very bad reasons. And the ones they remember for good things often encourage them to do something that they thought they couldn't do.
I love that. Thank you, Vienna, so much for coming on. Where can people learn more about the great work that you're doing?
We have a website, poliquicks.com. You can also download the app in the App Store starting on September 1st. And, my LinkedIn, anytime anyone wants to connect, I'm pretty responsive there. And yeah, we're just happy to share our message and hope that, more people get excited about civic education and getting, fixing the potholes or whatever is important to them.
We're going to make sure that we have all the links to the applications, to the websites that we discussed. Again, this is the Jeff Bradbury Show, episode number 55. Head on over to teachercast.net. Check out all of our shows at teachercast.net/podcast. Vienna, thank you so much for showing up. And once the app launches, please bring your team on. I would love to have it featured here on TeacherCast.
That would be amazing. Thank you so much.
And thank you guys for checking out this episode of the Jeff Bradbury Show. If you've been changing the world, I would love to have you guys as a guest. Head on over to teachercast.net, fill out our contact form. Would love to have you featured right here on the podcast. And that wraps up this episode of the Jeff Bradbury Show. On behalf of Vienna and everybody here on TeacherCast, my name is Jeff Bradbury, reminding you guys to keep up the great work in your classrooms and continue sharing your passions with your students.